I didn't flinch when my daughter, Chloe, threw the glass of ice water directly into my face in the middle of my own 72nd birthday dinner. I just sat there at the head of the table I had hand-carved 30 years ago, and let the freezing liquid soak into my sweater. But it wasn't just my family watching. Chloe had invited the neighbors, my former colleagues, and even the local press to witness my downfall. If you want to see how I dismantled her life after this ultimate betrayal, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the ending of this story is something you'll have to see to believe. "You're a senile old anchor, Dad," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the estate I built with my own hands. She didn't look like my daughter. She looked like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "You're a danger to yourself. You're confused, you're aggressive, and frankly, you're a disgrace to the Penhaligon name." The room went deathly quiet. I could see the neighbors whispering, their eyes darting from my wet face to the floor. My son-in-law, Tyler, stepped forward, holding a stack of legal documents like a trophy. He didn't look sad. He looked victorious. "It's over, Arthur," Tyler said, his smirk barely hidden behind a mask of fake concern. "We've already filed for emergency power of attorney. This house, the acreage, the car collection, it's all being liquidated. You're going to the Willows nursing home on Monday. Don't worry, they have a great view of the parking lot." My name is Arthur Penhaligon. For 40 years, the world knew me as a retired professor of architecture, a man who fed the birds and supposedly forgot where he put his glasses. I was the dodgy old man they thought they could easily manipulate. But as I looked at my daughter, I didn't see my child. I saw a structural flaw in a building that needed to be demolished. It started a year ago when they moved in. Slowly, the locks on my own rooms were changed. My mail started disappearing. I began feeling dizzy, my vision blurring at odd hours. I eventually found the black file in Tyler's briefcase. They were actively accelerating my mental decline by swapping my blood pressure medication with sugar pills to make me dizzy and confused. They had even used a deep fake of my voice to authorize the sale of my land to a predatory firm called Ironwood Holdings. But there was one thing Chloe never knew. Her mother had kept my secrets even from her. She thought I was just a teacher. She didn't know that in the 70s and 80s, I was the man who designed the black sites, the underground bunkers, and the high-security vaults for the world's most powerful and dangerous private entities. I knew every secret tunnel, every offshore shell company, and every person who owed a life debt to the man who made their secrets disappear. "Look at him," Chloe said to the crowd, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He doesn't even know where he is. He's staring into space like a ghost." I felt the heat of 100 judgmental eyes. My old friend, Harold, looked away in shame. The local reporter started typing on her phone. I was being erased in real time. My dignity was being stripped away like old wallpaper. "Get him out of here," Tyler commanded. Two high caregivers, who looked more like club bouncers, grabbed my arms. They didn't care about my hip or my dignity. They dragged me away from the table, my heels scuffing against the hardwood I had polished for decades. They dragged me up the narrow, creaking stairs to the attic. "Just getting you used to a smaller room, Pops," Tyler laughed, his voice muffled as he slammed the heavy oak door and turned the deadbolt. I sat in the darkness of the attic, the smell of dust and old memories filling my lungs. My wrist throbbed where the bouncer had gripped it, but my mind was suddenly, terrifyingly clay. The sugar pills were wearing off. I didn't bang on the wood. I didn't beg. I crawled to the corner of the room, behind a stack of my late wife's paintings. I reached into the hollowed-out leg of my old drafting stool, a hiding spot I had designed 40 years ago. My fingers brushed cold metal. I pulled out a satellite phone that hadn't been turned on in 2 decades. I flipped it open, the blue light illuminating my face. I dialed a number that didn't exist on any public registry, a number connecting directly to a man who lived in the shadows, a man who still breathed because of a vault I built for him in 1984. The line picked up on the first ring. "This is the architect," I said, my voice dropping the befuddled old man act and returning to the cold steel of the man I used to be. "The blueprint has been compromised. I need a total demolition." A cold, gravelly voice answered. "We thought you were a ghost, Arthur." I said, looking at the locked door. "But my daughter just tried to bury me alive. I want everything leveled. Chloe, Tyler, and the firm called Ironwood Holdings. Consider it leveled, Arthur. Give us 12 hours. I leaned back against the dusty wall and closed my eyes. The humiliation was over. Now, the demolition began. 12 hours after I made that call, the world thought Arthur Penhaligon had finally snapped. When Tyler opened the attic door to feed me a bowl of cold oatmeal, he found the window shattered and the room empty. He laughed, calling the police to report as senile wanderer, but he didn't realize that the man he was looking for no longer existed. I had climbed down the trellis, not with the shaky hands of a grandfather, but with the calculated movements of a man who had spent his youth scaling the skeletons of skyscrapers. I didn't head for the main road. I headed for a dry stone well at the edge of my property that I had built myself. Under the third stone from the bottom was a waterproof case containing $50,000 in cash, a clean passport, and a set of keys to a reinforced storage unit in the city. By the time the sun rose, I was standing in that storage unit, surrounded by the ghosts of my former life. I looked in the mirror and saw the man Chloe had spent a year trying to destroy. I took a pair of shears and cut my long, thinning white hair into a sharp, military buzz. I shaved the professor beard I'd worn for decades, revealing a jawline that was still as hard as granite. I swapped my soaked wool sweater for a charcoal tactical jacket and a pair of heavy boots. I didn't just look younger, I looked dangerous. If you're enjoying this transformation, comment revenge down below to let me know you're ready for the final blow. I spent the next 3 days in a cheap motel room, surrounded by 4 high-end laptops. Chloe and Tyler thought they were masters of manipulation, but they were playing checkers while I owned the board. I didn't just have recordings of their kitchen conversations. I had access to the firmware of every smart device in my estate. I watched through the doorbell camera as Tyler walked through my hallways, wearing my late father's gold watch and drinking my 30-year-old scotch. I watched Chloe on the phone with real estate agents, her eyes wide with greed as she discussed splitting the acreage into cookie-cutter subdivisions. "Is gone for good, babe," Tyler said, leaning against my hand-carved mantle. "The cops found his sweater by the river. They think he tripped and fell in. We just have to wait for the 7-day missing persons window to file the final papers." Chloe didn't even flinch at the mention of my death. She just sipped her wine and nodded. "Good. I want the vintage Ferraris moved to the auction house by Friday. We need the liquid cash for the Ironwood investment." They didn't realize that Ironwood Holdings was no longer a predatory development firm. Overnight, through a series of complex shell company acquisitions triggered by my satellite call, Ironwood had been bought by a holding company called Penhaligon Shadow. I was now their landlord, their investor, and their silent partner. I watched Tyler sign a series of urgent digital contracts that he thought were for the timber rights. In reality, he was signing personal guarantees that tied every cent of his and Chloe's future earnings to the debt of the company. I was weaving a web so tight they wouldn't feel it until the breath was crushed out of their lungs. But the physical revenge wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the same public shame they had forced on me. I knew about the Diamond Gala being held at the City Museum, a building I had designed 40 years ago. It was the social event of the year, and Chloe had been bragging about attending as the new owner of the Penhaligon estate. She wanted to debut her new life there, in the heart of the city I built. I spent my final night before the gala studying the blueprints of the museum. I knew every ventilation shaft, every hidden service corridor, and most importantly, the override codes for the massive digital projection system in the grand ballroom. I wasn't going to show up as Arthur the Professor. I was going to show up as a ghost. I spent hours practicing my gait, using a specialized orthopedic insert to change the way I walked so even my own daughter wouldn't recognize my silhouette. As I sat in the motel room, staring at the charcoal suit I had bought for the event, I felt a flicker of the old Arthur, the father who had held Chloe when she had nightmares. For a split second, my heart ached. But then I remembered the taste of the cold water she threw in my face. I remembered the sound of the deadbolt clicking shut in the attic. I remembered the sugar pills that had stolen my clarity. The ache vanished, replaced by a cold, architectural vacuum. They had kicked out the foundation of our family, and now they were going to learn that when a structure loses its support, it doesn't just lean, it collapses. The night of the Diamond Gala, the Museum of Modern Architecture was a fortress of glass and light. Chloe and Tyler pulled up in my silver 1961 Jaguar, the engine purring like a cat they had stolen. Chloe looked radiant in a gown of emerald silk, her neck draped in diamonds she had taken from my late wife's safe. Tyler adjusted his tuxedo, his chest puffed out with the unowned arrogance of a man who thought he'd successfully buried a giant. They walked up the marble steps, nodding to the cameras, completely unaware that the man who had laid those very stones was watching them from a service van parked across the street. I stepped out of the van, but I wasn't Arthur. I was wearing the heavy, navy blue uniform of a high-end security technician. I had a prosthetic silicone scar running down my jawline, heavy-rimmed tactical glasses, and a gray cap pulled low. I carried a professional tool case, and my posture was rigid, military-grade. When I approached the service entrance, the younger guard didn't even look at my face. He looked at the high-level clearance badge, a badge that had been remotely activated by my associates in the shadows. He tapped his scanner, the green light flashed, and the door hissed open. I was inside the heart of my own creation, and the museum's blueprints were burned into my retina. The grand ballroom was a masterpiece of open space and digital innovation. Massive 360-degree projectors lined the walls, currently displaying golden abstract art to match the gala's theme. I moved through the service corridors, the narrow veins of the building that the socialites never saw. I reached the master control hub, a room tucked behind the main stage. The two junior technicians were too busy staring at their phones to notice the senior inspector walking in. "System diagnostic," I said, my voice modulated to a lower, raspier growl. "We had a ping on the Ironwood server. I need the master override." They scrambled to give me the terminal, intimidated by my uniform and the cold efficiency of my movements. Within minutes, I had uploaded a new file into the gala's main presentation loop, a file I had titled The Final Blueprint. I synchronized the trigger to the moment Chloe would take the stage to receive the Philanthropist of the Year award, an honor she had bought with my stolen money. I left the control room and slipped into the ballroom, blending into the shadows near the catering staff. I watched them. I watched Tyler laughing with the mayor, boasting about his visionary plans for the Penhaligon estate. I watched Chloe basking in the adulation, her eyes sparkling with the cold fire of a woman who believed she had finally stepped out of her father's shadow. I stood just 10 feet away from her at one point, my heart steady, my eyes locked on her profile. She looked directly at me for a split second, asking for a glass of champagne, but she didn't see her father. She saw a servant. She saw a nobody. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the 300 guests. The CEO of the museum stepped to the podium, his voice booming through the speakers. "Tonight, we honor a legacy. We honor the Penhaligon name, carried forward by a daughter who has shown such grace in the face of her father's unfortunate decline. Please, welcome Chloe Miller to the stage." The applause was a roar as Chloe walked up the stairs, the emerald silk of her dress shimmering under the spotlights. She took the microphone, her face a mask of humble gratitude. "Thank you," she began, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "My father always said that architecture is about the strength of the foundation. And while he is no longer with us in mind, I am proud to protect the foundation he built." I reached into my pocket and pressed a single button on a remote transmitter. The golden art on the walls vanished. In its place, the giant projectors began to scream with a different kind of light. A recording started to play, but it wasn't a tribute. It was the high-definition footage from my kitchen. The audio was crystal clear, piped through the museum's $1 million sound system. "The sugar pills are working, Tyler. He was so dizzy today he couldn't even find his shoes. We'll have the power of attorney signed by Friday." The ballroom went from a roar to the silence of a tomb. Chloe froze, her hand still clutching the award. Her face went from emerald to a ghostly, sickly white. She looked up at the walls, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen. On the 40-foot screen behind her, the image shifted to the forged quitclaim deeds, with a red forgery detected stamp flashing over my signature. I stepped out from the shadows of the pillars and walked toward the stage. I took off the gray cap. I removed the tactical glasses. I stood at the base of the stage, looking up at the daughter who had tried to bury me. The bouncers moved to stop me, but the CEO, who had just seen the evidence of the fraud, held up a hand to stay them. I climbed the stage slowly, my cane nowhere to be found, my back as straight as a steel beam. I reached the podium, took the microphone from Chloe's limp, shaking hand, and looked out at the elite of the city who had watched me be disgraced just days before. I stood at the podium, the silence in the grand ballroom so thick it felt like the air before a building collapses. Chloe was trembling so violently that the emerald silk of her gown rustled like dry leaves. Tyler was at the foot of the stage, his face a grotesque shade of gray, his mouth hanging open as he watched his own voice on the 40-foot screens detailing how he planned to liquidate the old man. I leaned into the microphone, my voice calm, resonant, and stripped of any senile frailty. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked only at my daughter. Her eyes were darting, searching for an exit, but the room was a vault of her own making, and I was the only one with the code. Architecture is indeed about the foundation, Chloe, I said, the words echoing with a terrifying clarity. But you forgot the most basic rule. If you build on a lie, the weight of the truth will eventually crush you. You didn't just betray your father, you betrayed the very stones of this city. I turned to the audience, my gaze level and piercing. My name is Arthur Penhaligon. I am not missing. I am not dead. And as you can see, I'm perfectly sound of mind. The documents my daughter used to seize my estate were forged. The Ironwood firm they sold my land to, I bought it 3 days ago. Tyler, Chloe, you didn't sell my legacy. You sold yourselves into a debt you can never pay back. Tyler tried to bolt for the door, but the gray-suited man from my satellite call, the forensic auditors, who were actually high-level private security, blocked every exit. They didn't use force. They just stood there, immovable as pillars. I turned back to Chloe. Her expression was a haunting mix of horror and a sudden, sickening realization. She reached out a hand, her fingers twitching. Dad, please. It was Tyler's idea. He pushed me. The recordings say otherwise, Chloe, I replied, my voice devoid of anger, which seemed to terrify her more. I watched you swap the pills. I watched you laugh when you thought I was lost in the fog. You didn't just want the money. You wanted to watch me disappear. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a final legal folder. I've spent 40 years building things to last. But tonight, I'm specializing in demolition. I have already filed for the annulment of your power of attorney. I have frozen every account you touched. And because you signed those Ironwood personal guarantees, every asset you own, your cars, your clothes, the very jewelry you're wearing, now belongs to Penhaligon's shadow. The gasps from the socialites were like a wave. Chloe collapsed to her knees, the emerald gown bunching around her. She started to stutter, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. What am I supposed to do? You're going to do exactly what you planned for me, I said, leaning down so only she could hear the final blow. I've rented a small, one-bedroom apartment in the industrial district. It is a great view of the parking lot. You'll work the jobs I've assigned to you until the $340,000 you stole is paid back with interest. You wanted to manage my life. Now, I manage yours. The police arrived then, but they weren't there for me. They had the evidence of the forgery and the medical tampering. As they led Chloe and Tyler out in handcuffs, the cameras that Chloe had invited to witness my disgrace captured every second of her walk of shame. She didn't look like a philanthropist. She looked like a structural failure. 6 months later, the estate is quiet again. I sit at my hand-carved table, the wood smooth under my palms. I still feed the birds every morning at 6 a.m. I still visit my wife's grave every Sunday. People in town call me sir again, but they do it with a new kind of look in their eyes. A look of profound respect mixed with a healthy dose of fear. I'm 72 years old. I've lived a life of secrets and a life of stone. I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about the integrity of the structure. My house is solid. My mind is clear. And as I look out over the Pacific Northwest timberline that I saved from the soars, I know that the foundation is finally, truly, permanent. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Tank by you.